came up with them himself. Rob came up with the harmonies.
Yes. Yeah.
This song we are doing quite different from how it happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there isn't a second voice or anything.
Yeah. Or
I am
drums.
I am trying to not do the melody as much as possible. Which one? Oh.
It's fun though, and we sound so pretty. It's bothering me because I know that song, but I can't remember what it is. Sounds familiar.
This is a favorite of Carol and I's. It is a song called O Tango Suerte by Masayoshi Takanaka.
Cool.
I love this song so much. He writes just like the music with the best vibes.
Heck yeah. All right, I'm gonna go check on Kathy.
Any songs y'all want to do? Any songs y'all want to do? Like, yeah, just in general. Yeah. Yeah. Don't even worry about the sermons. Like, what is a song you want to do over here sometime? Yeah. Okay. Dude, send them to me so I can start learning them. Yeah. this is the John Batiste one. Yeah, we should do this. I like this.
I think he's won some awards. Somebody, yeah, you have to work on the vocals on this one.
Yeah.
And it really, it's got those octave jumps in there, but if you put it in the right key,
Yeah, it'll sound real nice.
Good morning. My name is Carol West. My pronouns are she, her, and I am so very pleased to be your worship associate this morning. Whether this is the first time that you've been with us or you've been with us for years, both here in person and online, we, the congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Corpus Christi, unequivocally and unconditionally welcome you as your full, authentic self here, right at this moment. We intentionally welcome everyone. We welcome every gender expression and sexual orientation. We welcome every race and ethnicity. We welcome you no matter which political party or affiliation you might have, whatever level of ability or socioeconomic class or education. We especially welcome those who face the hatred, cruelty, and judgment of others for simply being who they are. May you find sanctuary here, now. We acknowledge that the land that we gather on here has been occupied by human beings for thousands of years. The indigenous tribes that have lived here include the Coahuiltecans, the Karankawa, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa, Aransas, Copanos, Malakis, and others. Our gathering together during this time has intention and purpose. This space, at this time, is holy and sacred. Though we may often fall short of our ideals, we intend to grow as spiritual and moral beings. To that end, we recite a covenant each week, which is not a creed, but a promise we make to one another. Our congregation has also adopted a covenant of positive relations, which is a longer statement of how we as a congregation live into our covenant, both within and outside these walls. We invite everyone to enter into relationship, to form our beloved community together, as we learn how to live into our principles. For our announcements, if I could please have Robin Kennedy come up to make her announcement.
Good morning. John and I and all of the, what is the name of our group? The Fling, Fellowship Fling Group would like to invite you to come to our home next week at 4:30 for a taco party. Everything's free, all the food will be provided. You could bring your own bottle or beer if you'd like to, but everything else will be provided. And we hope everybody in the church will come. We'd like to get to know everybody a little better. And if it rains, I'm afraid we'll have to move it to the church because it's going to be outdoors. So anyway, we hope everybody will come. Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds like a lot of fun, and I hope a lot of people end up going. As far as all other announcements, those can be found in the order of service towards the back, or you can check online for all other announcements. It is our custom in this church to offer visitors and newcomers a chance to introduce themselves if they feel comfortable doing so. If it's your first time here, or you just feel ready to say hello after coming for a while, we invite you to stand as you are able, or raise your hand and tell us your name and where you are from. Ren will go around with the microphone to hand that to you. So are there any visitors or newcomers here today who would like to introduce themselves?
Yes, hello, good morning. My name is Elio Padilla. We've been living in Corpus for a couple of years now, but this is the first time that we visit. I'm here with my husband, Saint. We have just a few more months here in Corpus before we leave, but we wanted to visit at least and stay connected for the next few weeks while we're here. And we feel very welcome this morning. Thank you.
Welcome, we're happy to have you. Are there any other newcomers that would like to introduce themselves? No? Well, we are happy that you are here regardless, and we welcome you to join us after the sermon for coffee and conversation. We would like to get to know you. And our service will now begin. Our opening words are, "It has been said that church is a place where you get to practice what it means to be human. So it might be wise to consider the following. We humans are social beings. We come into the world as the result of others' actions. We survive here in dependence on others, whether we like it or not. There is hardly a moment of our lives when we do not benefit from others' activities. For this reason, it is hardly surprising that most of our happiness arises in the context of our relationships with others." At this time, I would like to invite Mari up to light our chalice while I share these chalice lighting words with y'all. May this flame, symbol of transformation since time began, fire our curiosity, strengthen our wills, and sustain our courage as we seek what is good within and around us, appreciation of our shared hopes and values. Please rise and body your spirit for the affirmation of our church covenant. Love is a doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity to the end, that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all we hold sacred. You may now be seated. And now for our story for all ages, if I could please have Lauren come up to read that for us today.
Just need my little stool. Good morning. So our story this morning is one of my favorites. It's a parable called The Good Samaritan, and this version is told by Christopher Buse, who is a Unitarian Universalist minister. Jesus of Nazareth liked to tell parables to people in villages. Parables are stories that teach people how to be more kind or loving or generous. One day, Jesus was telling the gathering to love your neighbor as yourself. Someone asked him, "Who is my neighbor?" And this is the parable he told. One day, a merchant was traveling on the road when he was attacked by bandits. The bandits were so cruel that they beat the merchant, stole everything he had, and left him for dead, lying on the side of the road. The merchant was so badly hurt that he could not move or speak at all, and he could barely see through his swollen black eyes. A long time passed, and then down the road came a priest, a man of God. The priest looked good. He was wearing a fancy new robe, and he was nice and clean from a recent bath. When the merchant saw the priest coming, he became excited. Surely this priest will help me, he thought. But when the priest saw the man lying on the side of the road, he just kept walking and passed him right by. After a time, the merchant saw another man coming down the road. This man was a temple helper, and he looked good. He was well-groomed and had a nice new haircut. He wore beautiful colored robes and had a winning smile. Once again, the merchant became more hopeful. Surely this man will help me, he thought. But when the temple helper saw the merchant lying by the side of the road, he too just kept walking and passed him right by. A very long time passed, and the merchant began to lose hope. I will die here on the side of the road, he thought. But then he saw another man walking down the road on a donkey. This man didn't look too good. He was dirty, and his clothes had holes in them. He didn't look like he had shaved or cut his hair in a long time. This man will not help me, thought the merchant. He's from Samaria, and Samaritans hate my people. But when the man saw the merchant lying by the side of the road, he stopped. He was moved with compassion. The Samaritan washed and bandaged the merchant's wounds. He put the merchant on the back of his donkey, and then he carried him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, as the Samaritan prepared to leave, he gave the innkeeper money and said, "Please take care of this man. When I return, I will pay you any more money that you may spend." From his window in the inn, the merchant could see the Samaritan walking off into the distance. He was too weak to call out or even speak his thanks, but ever since then, the merchant has known deep in his heart that there is a big difference between looking good and being good. I'd now like to invite the children and youth to join Sadie and I in religious exploration.
After our meditation reading and time of silence, and when the music begins, all who would like to are invited to come to the chalice table and light a candle representing a joy or a sorrow you may be holding in your heart today. Please come up one or two at a time using the middle aisle. And if you were with us online today, you are welcome to share your joys and sorrows in the chat feature. Attitude is a choice. Happiness is a choice. Optimism is a choice. Kindness is a choice. Giving is a choice. Respect is a choice. Whatever choice you make makes you, so choose wisely. I now invite you into a time of silent meditation. Our speaker today is Kirk Newport. Kirk Newport was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, but raised in California. After college at San Francisco State University, he served 3 years in the United States Army, followed by careers in hospital clinical laboratories and teaching clinical lab science at Del Mar College. He has been a member of U2C3 since 1996. During that time, he has been a board member 2 times, a choir member, and longtime church grounds worker. He is an amateur cellist and enjoys most outdoor activities. Kirk has a daughter, 3 stepsons, and multiple grandchildren. Originally raised as a Methodist, Kirk is now a Buddhist. And now I welcome up Kirk to the podium.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to begin this morning with an excerpt from the book, How Jesus Became God. It's by the religious scholar Bart Ehrman. He's a hardcore scholar, but he's also written many books for the lay audience, and you've probably seen them. There's a bit of a curveball coming. I'm just letting you know. Y'all know what I mean by a curveball. You think it's going one way, but it's going to go another way. Also, and this isn't in my notes, but he said something that I think it would be good to preface everything I say this morning. And he says, history is not the past. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive because, well, if it's not the past, what is it? And he explained that there are many things in the past we cannot know, that we can never know. For example, you will probably never be able to find out what you ate for dinner 14 years ago. It would be impossible. So the analogy is that there are many things in history that we cannot know. And with regard to the story of Jesus and Easter, there are things we do not know, and we'll probably never know. For example, was he raised from the dead? We don't know that. But what he said, that history is what we might be able to discover or at least infer from evidence. So there's a big difference between what we know and what we don't know, and there's always going to be that ambiguous area between the two. So here's the excerpt. When I teach my introductory course on the New Testament, I tell my students that it is very difficult to know where to begin our exploration. Is it best to start with our earliest author of the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, who wrote more of the books of the New Testament than any other author? Or is it best to start with the Gospels, which, while written after Paul, discuss the life of Jesus, who lived before Paul wrote his letters? In the end, I tell them it is probably best to begin by telling the story of a highly unusual man who was born in the 1st century in a remote part of the Roman Empire, whose life was described by his later followers as altogether miraculous. Before he was born, his mother had a visitor from heaven who told her that her son would not be a mere mortal, but in fact would be divine. His birth was accompanied by unusual divine signs in the heavens. As an adult, he left his home to engage in an itinerant preaching ministry. He went from village to town, telling all who would listen that they should not be concerned about their earthly lives and their material goods. They should live for what was spiritual and eternal. He gathered a number of followers around him who became convinced that he was no ordinary human, that he was the Son of God. And he did miracles to confirm them in their beliefs. He could heal the sick. He could cast out demons and even raise the dead. At the end of his life, he aroused opposition from the ruling authorities of Rome and was put on trial. But they could not kill his soul. He ascended to heaven to live there until this day. To prove that he lived after leaving this earthly orb, he appeared again to at least one of his doubting followers who wrote books about him, and we can still read about him today. And here's the curveball. but few of you will have ever seen or even heard about these books. Most of you, I'm sure, have probably never heard of this great miracle-working Son of God. I am referring to a man called Apollonius. Anyone ever heard of Apollonius? He was born in, that's good. He was born in Tyana, which is in modern-day Turkey. He was a pagan, that is, he was a polytheistic worshiper of the many Roman gods and a renowned philosopher of his day. His followers thought he was immortal. Most of us here today know that our sermons or messages or homilies, whatever name you would like to use them, are planned weeks in advance by the worship team. And I have to throw this in a plug, intrepidly led by Django and Lauren. So a couple of months ago on our weekly Zoom meeting, Django was looking at the calendar and said, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said, hey, March 31st, that's Easter. Should we do an Easter service? Do we want to do an Easter service? There was a pause. The pause, awkward pause, it continued, it dragged out. The meeting got really quiet and Django's like, well, don't everybody talk at once, please. And he says, well, you definitely don't want me doing this. You don't want a Jew doing a service about Easter. So the irony was, the meeting ended with basically a blank. We did not fill out who was going to do the service on March 31st. And I'm not bringing this up to put any shade on the worship team, because I was one of those silent people as well. I was there. But I came away from the meeting thinking how it was kind of a strange thing, that there was this, reluctance or fear or intimidation that, oh my God, would Unitarians actually talk about Easter? I mean, that's a very heavy topic. But I'm sure that in UU churches all over the country, they're talking about Easter today, and we talk about lots of religions in here. Just recently, we're talking about bringing Jains and Sikhs and the Hindus back, and so nothing seems off the plate for us. So I keep thinking, why would Easter be such a bugaboo for us? But I have to admit, Easter is a little bit different. And why is that? For many, probably most Christians, Easter is the most important, most solemn, most sacred event in Christian history. It defines Christian theology for most people. And many might consider it the most important event in all of human history. Unlike Christmas, which has been merrily assimilated into our popular and commercial culture, Easter has remained a largely, profoundly religious event. But should you use the majority, which are probably not traditional Christians, be discussing Easter? The answer, I think, comes directly from the UUA itself, and I got this off the website. I'm sort of paraphrasing what it said. As UUs, we affirm that wisdom and spirituality are drawn from diverse sources, such as science, poetry, scripture, and personal experience. These sources include the wisdom of the world's religions, including Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to love our neighbors as ourselves. And with regard to today's sermon, I have to throw in, the pagan traditions as well. So absolutely yes, why wouldn't we want to discuss Easter? If I had to write a very short biography of Jesus, thinking this would be my biography, it would read something like this. Jesus was born in the town of Nazareth to a lower-class Jewish family in the backwater of a minor Roman province. We know extremely little of his childhood, although some New Testament scriptures have the young Jesus debating the learned high priest about fine theological points. It is unclear what his education might have been. It's possible that he was illiterate. which would have been a completely normal thing of a person from his place and time. In adulthood, he became an itinerant preacher wandering the countryside. He did not form a church as we would recognize it, but collected a community of followers. He was believed to have cured the sick and even raised the dead. He taught kindness, charity, and compassion, especially for the poorest and most downtrodden of us. His teachings, I think, are most poignantly encapsulated in a variety of parables, which are not long, dense theological arguments, but short, clear tales that illustrated his values. What is sometimes not emphasized is that he was, let me see if I can say this correctly, an apocalyptist. That is, he preached that the end times were coming. God was displeased with the state of human affairs and was about to pass judgment on all. To get good with God, one had to demonstrate all these virtues of kindness. Just to make the point again, he wasn't talking about being kind and virtuous so you would have a nice long life. He didn't think you were going to have a nice long life. He thought the end was coming. So he was talking about being ready, to answer to God himself, and soon. Some thought he was the Jewish Messiah, the King of the Jews. Again, in this context, that meant that he would become a great leader, not in the current state, but in the next state that was going to come after God destroyed all the wickedness on earth and would restore a new kingdom based on peace and love. At the end of his life, he traveled to Jerusalem, probably for the first and definitely last time. He caused a disturbance in the temple and was arrested by the Roman authorities. There was no trial. He was executed in a particularly gruesome Roman public spectacle by crucifixion. The Gospels have different accounts of which of Jesus' family or other followers were there. The apostles are all said to have fled. After this, and this is where my version differs dramatically from traditional Christianity, there are good reasons to believe that Jesus was not buried, mainly because that was not the Roman practice following crucifixions. A crucifixion, I'll mention this at the end, a crucifixion was there was a process. There was a sequence of events that had to take place, and it did not involve burial. If there was no burial, there was no tomb. There was no empty tomb and no risen body. And again, that's the end of my short. I was raised a Methodist, and Easter was an anticipated event on the church calendar. Even as a child, though, I knew it was a big deal, but the Easter hunt is what I really look forward to. I knew of the crucifixion, but the associated theology was not something honestly, I was just not old enough to really understand what was going on most of the time. My best sense of it was that it was a terrible injustice. I remember asking my mother, interestingly, my father never went to church, ever. My mother took me though. So I directed all my theological questions towards her, but as a young child, these are the questions I would ask her. Why would anyone want to execute a good person like Jesus? Why was the day Jesus executed called Good Friday? And this made no sense to me. And I always, for reasons because I was reading books and I would see pictures of Jesus, I says, what did Jesus look like? And just strangely enough, just literally a week ago, I got a little pamphlet from Seventh-day Adventist, I can't remember who, and it was a kind of traditional Jesus, but he looks suspiciously way too European for my taste. I sang songs in Sunday school where my mother played the piano, and the songs were Jesus loves all the little children of the world, and I won't sing it for you, believe me. And Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. So that was sort of my introduction to Christianity. And I was perfectly okay with it, and I still am. I don't have any bad memories of those days. And in fact, my sense of it all was an overwhelming feeling of benevolence, that there was this great man named Jesus who did good things, and yet he was punished for them. After Sunday school, I often attended the formal church services with my mother, where I recited the Nicene Creed many times. And believe me, that went way, way over my head. But in order to make a point in my homily, I'm going to read it for you now. But I'm noting, I'm not asking you to read it. I'm not asking you to recite it. I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm reading the Nicene Creed. That's all I'm doing. But I'll give you a little quiz. Of all of it, there are only 9 words in it that I still believe. So my challenge to you is to figure out what those words are. And remember, I'm a Buddhist. And here's the Nicene Creed. I'll go fast. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before in all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, co-substantial with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us men and for our salvation he came down from heaven, and by the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, and became man. For our sake he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death and was buried, and rose again on the 3rd day in accordance with the Scriptures. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom will have no end. Anybody have some muscle memory kick in? Yeah, I did too. Can anyone guess which phrase I still believe in? Go for it.
He was crucified and buried, suffered under
Oh,
punishment.
you nailed it. Very good. Yeah, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He suffered death. That's really the only part I still accept. The Nicene Creed, though, is very poetic, and it's arguably one of the most important individual documents in Western history. Again, I'm going off script a little bit. I've heard Dr. Ehrman interviewed a few times, and he says, well, what do you think about the Bible? And he says, oh, it's the most important book in Western history. And he says, I don't think it's arguable. And I think he's right. I mean, you really can't judge Western civilization for better or for worse without considering, the foundations in the Bible. The Nicene Creed, though, is also a very complicated document that I didn't fully appreciate when as a child, and I still kind of have issues with it. But in his book, How Jesus Became God, Dr. Ehrman opened my eyes on a lot of very broad ideas that I didn't fully understand before I started, doing some research for this homily this morning. Just a few ideas quickly. It's really complicated to understand the cultural and historical context of the time of Jesus. Not only do you need to understand the history of early Christianity, which means you have to be able to read, ancient Greek and, Latin. You had to understand a pretty complex, fluid culture. But that's just Christianity. You also have to understand Judaism, which is where Christianity sprang from. And if that's not enough on your plate, you also have to understand the Greco-Roman, all the pagan cultures. So you have 3 very different cultures all coexisting together in the same place and time, and they're all bleeding into each other. So it's a very complicated situation that's going on. The Nicene Creed, which is accepted as orthodoxy today, as entrenched as it is, it took, I would say, in the ballpark of 350 years of near constant debate and controversy before it basically coalesced into the form I just told you. And the last thing I want to mention on this item is the culture at that time was quite different from ours in many ways. But one of the main differences is that in modern times, we tend to think of heaven and earth as kind of these two realms, and they're not strictly divided, but it's a pretty firm division. You know, God, if he decides to, some people would tell you can do whatever he wants, so if he wants to visit us, that's fine. But we don't really get to go up to heaven until the end of our lives. So it's a pretty rigid division between heaven, the earthly orb, and the heavenly orb. That was not at all the case in antiquity. It was a very fluid situation. People were going up, gods were coming down, there were many gods. Even in Jewish traditions, there were many spirits that could manifest themselves on earth. Gods were not equal. Some gods were better than others. Some gods were more powerful than others. Some gods were specialists. Some gods were kind of generalists. It was a very fluid situation, and everyone accepted that. So it was not clear-cut at all. Alexander the Great, for example, was thought to be a god. Sometimes people were so spectacularly successful in whatever it is they did, whether as a philosopher or as a warrior, it was thought that they obviously had godlike qualities, and it was just manifest that they were better than ordinary people. So it was not this rigid division that we have now. Oh, and lastly, and even this comes up in the Bible, some gods would be consumed by lust for beautiful women, and just couldn't control themselves, and there were offspring between gods and humans. I opened the story of Apollonius, basically to illustrate this point, that this was a time when what it was to be a god and what it was to be a human was not quite so clear-cut as we see it today. So, how does Jesus fit into all of this? Firstly, you can make a strong argument that the deification of Jesus by the early Christians was the most important event in Western history. And the argument goes something like this. If Jesus had not been deified, then he would have remained a Jewish prophet. And he would have had a small school of followers that had followed him. And like Apollonius, he would have had his school. But what that meant was there would not have been any Christians. And had there not been Christians, they would not have been able to proselytize the Gentiles. Okay, it's the second question. What's a Gentile?
Just raising my hand.
Going? Oh, God. What? Not Jewish, exactly. Oh, you guys are good today. You're 2 for 2. Yeah, basically in antiquity, there were only two kinds of people. There were Jews, and there were not Jews. And the Gentiles, in fact, I think the word Gentile comes from goy, or something. It's a Hebrew word for guy. But you're not Jewish if you're a Gentile. So the point was, if you couldn't proselytize the Gentiles, then there wouldn't have been Christians for the Emperor Constantine to incorporate into his empire and try to solidify what were essentially, growing pains for the empire. Constantine is debatable whether or not he was really interested in Christian theology or not, but he did want to put the Christians to work in helping him consolidate his empire. So no Gentiles, no Christians, the Roman Empire would have basically dissolved, and who knows, there wouldn't have been a Christian Europe. And then it gets very speculative. Maybe there wouldn't have been a Renaissance. Maybe there wouldn't have been a scientific revolution. We don't know. But it's a fair argument to say that without the deification of Jesus, none of this, it would have been very different. When most Christians today say that Jesus is God, it sounds fairly straightforward. You see it all the time, Jesus is God. But that was not always the case. And as I mentioned earlier with regard to the Nicene covenant, it took about 350 years to work that out. It's interesting to note that reading the Gospels, there are different patterns of statements about how his divinity actually took place. For example, in the early Gospels, like the Gospel, okay, I'm on a roll. What's the first Gospel? Mark. Matthew. Yeah. And who's the last? John, right, exactly. In the first, yeah, there's a little overlap in there. It's debatable. The first Gospels, the earlier Gospels, Jesus' claim to divinity are a little unclear. By the time you get to John, they are very clear. I am the way and the light. No one can. John 3:16, you see it at every football game. There was definitely a pattern of how his claims to divinity got stronger as they moved through the Gospels. By John, Jesus was already divine at birth and had been so for all eternity. What did Jesus say about his divinity? It's the same pattern. Again, it gets more explicit as it goes on. Oh, and what I meant to say, when did he become divine? At the earliest Gospels, he became divine on the resurrection. And then as you move along, he became divine at his baptism. And then he became divine at birth. And then he became divine before birth. And not only before birth, that he was a pre-existent divine being that had always existed. So it changes as we move through the Gospels. It's so complicated. Reading the book, I came away impressed with how difficult it is to try to dissect all these different threads. One of the greatest controversies in early Christianity was the Arian heresy. And the term heresy, of course, is attached by the victors in the debate, where we're the Orthodox Christians. Then as now, history is almost always written by the winners, but Arius was a 4th century Christian who declared that Christ was not divine, but a created being subservient to God. God alone was immutable and self-existent. So the winning side of this course was not Arius, but what eventually became the doctrine of the Trinity. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit were all the same, co-equal manifestations of the same eternal presence. Again, it gets very poetic, which for me is always problematic when they're trying to explain something. I would be remiss if I neglected that much later on, a group of heretics came along that rejected the Trinity based mainly on the fact that it was not found in the Hebrew or Christian scriptures. Okay, you better get this one right. Who rejected the Trinity? The Unitarians, of course. Yeah, okay. So I had to get us in there somehow. My own interpretation of the Gospels is that Jesus was fully human. It's happened at least a few times that when I tell people I was raised a Christian, but now identify as a Buddhist, I sometimes get a sense that they feel I'm being disrespectful to Jesus. I usually just say something to the effect that I no longer believe in the non-scientific parts of the stories. But then the follow-up question sometimes goes like this: well, do you think Jesus ever even existed? I mean, was there a Jesus? And I like this question a lot better, and I'll explain it in just a moment. I'd like to set up my ending this morning with a quick return to the Nicene Creed. From my reading, I have a much better understanding of the cultural and historic milieu from which it arose. It's a rich, complex statement of faith that gives people a lot of comfort and a lot of hope. And I would never take that away from anybody, because God knows we need all the comfort and hope we can get. But if it's supposed to be a sort of Christian mission statement, I feel it's lacking the most important thing. It doesn't address the work of Jesus. It discusses the theology of Jesus, who he was, but it doesn't talk anything about actually what he did. When people ask me if Jesus existed, or do I think Jesus existed, I say, yes, I do. Not because of anything Not because of these, theological arguments. I'm not big on theological arguments. To me, the logic always tends to be circular and comes back reinforcing what you already decided, what you wanted to believe in the first place. And everyone has their own theological arguments, and it's very hard to cross those bridges. But I say yes because there seems to be something really gritty, something very earthy, something very natural and human in the story of the guy from nowhere who wandered the roads and villages preaching about the most basic human desires. And I think that's basically to live in peace and love with your family and neighbors. This is not a theologically complicated argument. And I think it must have made an intense impression on his disciples and those who heard him afterwards or heard of him afterwards. My takeaways from Easter this morning are these. The first is just my own personal thoughts. My impressions of Jesus really haven't changed since my childhood. He was a compassionate human being that suffered injustice at the hands of an unjust political system. I would be interested to hear how your own interpretations might have changed since you were a child. Secondly, Lauren asked me, what do you think the reading should be today? And I said, let's do the Good Samaritan. I love the Good Samaritan. It demonstrates the unfortunately unusual ability for anyone to exercise compassion in any circumstance, even if it's not required for your own immediate well-being. It's hard, and I don't know why that is. I guess it's a human weakness, perhaps. Again, the Samaritans, what didn't come up in the story was the merchant is understood to be Jewish. And then he has two people passing by, and then thirdly, the Samaritan, who were not on good terms with the Jews. You have a Samaritan who you would think, or at least according to the thinking of the time, would not be disposed to be compassionate towards anybody, and certainly not a Jew, and yet he is. So it demonstrates the ability to, anyone could be compassionate. And lastly, this is the image of the crucifixion. Again, I said the crucifixion was a process. I mean, there was an order of events that had to take place. And this was true for a lot of executions in antiquity. In fact, this is me. I think there are 4 parts. The first part, you had to be publicly humiliated. So Jesus was dragged through the streets, dragging the crucifix, the crown of thorns, jammed on his head, and people were laughing and throwing things at him. So he had to be publicly humiliated. And then you had to suffer as long as was physiologically possible. So you had to prolong the agony. I mean, that was just, what was the point of doing this if you weren't going to drag it out? I mean, this was a public spectacle. Everybody could watch. Then you died. Well, that's only the third part. There's still another part left. The last part is you had to desecrate the body for as long as it was, again, biologically possible. So the body in ancient times was left on the cross, and it was usually left for scavengers, birds, dogs, whoever came along. And it would stay up there for quite a while. So the message was that when you saw all of this happen, you understood that whoever this person was, whatever they'd done, they are gone. They are done forever, and they are never, ever coming back, because you've just watched it all come to a slow, agonizing end. The gift of Easter, I think, is that may not be the case. There are ideas, I think, that keep coming back to us. An ability to see into the past and ourselves and to look at others with kindness, compassion, and love always. And that's an idea that is really hard to get rid of. So when I think of scenes of the crucifixion, that's what I think of. That there are ideas that we thought were dead, maybe they hoped were dead, but they're really not. And that's my message this Sunday. Have a great Easter, and thank you for coming.
Now is the time that we participate in the care of our church community by giving and receiving the offering. If you are contributing to your pledge today, be sure to write pledge on your check or cash envelope. When the music begins, the ushers will present the offering basket to you, and all you have to do is drop your offering in, no passing required. In addition to the basket, and for those joining us at home, we have several options for making a Sunday offering. Please use the links on screen to give through our website, by PayPal, or by using the Vanco mobile app. Your offering, no matter how you make it, will be gratefully received. We will now proceed with the collection of the offering. And please remain seated after the music is over for the closing of our service.
My father, he came in. I was 9 years old. And he stood so tall above me. His eyes, they were shining, and his voice was very cold. Said I'd had a vision, and you know I'm strong and holy. I must do what I've been told. So we started up the mountain. I was running, he was walking, and his axe was made of gold. The trees, they got much smaller. The lake, a lady's nearer. We stopped to drink some wine. Then he threw the bottle over, broke a minute later, and he put his hand on mine. Thought I saw an eagle, but it might have been a vulture. I never could decide. And my father built an altar. He looked once behind his shoulder and knew I would not hide. The altar's now to sacrifice these children. You must not do it anymore. A scheme is not a vision, and you never have been tempted by a demon or a god. You stand above them now, your hatchet's blunt and bloody. You were not there before. When I lay upon a mountain, and my father's hand was trembling with the beauty of the world.
As we extinguish our chalice today, I'd like to share these closing words. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the servant of truth. Question your convictions, for beliefs too tightly held strangle the mind and its natural wisdom. Suspect all certitudes, for the world whirls on, nothing abides. Yet in our inner rooms, full of doubt, inquiry, and suspicion, let a corner be reserved for trust. For without trust, there is no space for communities to gather or for friendships to be forged. Indeed, this is the small corner where we connect with each other. Until we are together again, friends, be well, be true, be loving, and may the blessings be.
If you call me brother now, forgive me if I inquire, just according to whose plan. When it all comes down to dust, I will kill you if I must, I will help you if I can. When it all comes down to dust, I will help you if I must, I will kill you if I can.
And
Mercy on our uniform, man of peace or man of war, the peacock spreads its fan.
All right. Another good week, y'all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take a look at some